Welcome everyone, Christine here with my Legendary Lore tier list for Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires patch 6.0. Keep in mind there are probably some balance changes that are going to be coming out by the end of the month and maybe even further down the line. But I'm going to go based on where the game is right now, though I am going to consider some of the things that Creative Assembly could change very easily, just a minor things that they could do for Skulltaker, Gorbad, or Maneater. So anyway, this is going to be from Broken to Daniel tier. Daniel tier being, of course, the Demon Prince. Broken means that a campaign is so ridiculously strong that it kind of breaks the game. It can be fun a couple of times, to be sure, but I do think the replayability may suffer because it's too ridiculous to a certain extent, from my point of view. But what am I considering for this particular tier list? Well, here are the things I care about. And I think these are the important aspects when judging a campaign. Replayability, having a dynamic campaign, having good mechanics, but not so ridiculously overpowered that you're breaking the game. It is a difficult balancing act. Not all campaigns are going to manage it. In fact, very few do. But the ones that do that, the ones that do kind of manage that to an extent or another are going to be what I consider the S tier campaigns. And from there, lower and lower and lower. And yeah, Daniel tier are basically campaigns that are not worth playing. F tier, better. You can enjoy them sometimes, to be sure. Like Daniel tier are basically campaigns that are not worth freaking touching whatsoever. Not worth it at all in the game right now. Whereas F tier, you can still enjoy them, you can still have fun with them, but they do have severe issues. So anyway, with that said, starting with Karl Franz, S-tier campaign. What sets this campaign apart from many other campaigns and all other Imperial campaigns is how dynamic it is. Because of Karl Franz's starting position and his guaranteed confederation with Electra counts, you end up having a campaign that plays out very differently dependent on what choices you go for. Do you go for Kazrak? Do you go for Festus? Do you go for Grom? Do you go for Kemler? Do you go for Marienburg? Do you confederate Marienburg? You have a lot of different choices to make in this campaign, and it ends up being great for it. You do have a good amount of faction power, but you don't have ridiculously powerful armies. It's more so about campaign power and the benefits you have over there. I do really think that Creative Assembly turned this campaign from one of the worst in the game, pre-Thrones of Decay, to one of the best in the game after the release of Thrones of Decay. And just shows how racial reworks and Lord reworks can really make a campaign absolutely worth playing in many ways. They based it on Jan Bo, but I think they made it one of the best campaigns in the game. Certainly the best Empire campaign. Then we have Balthazar Gelt. I think I'm going to put Gelt in A or B. It's an interesting one. So I'm going to go with A. Like, you look at his spells in battle, like the Cataclysm spells. You look at faction mechanics. You can see the Creative Assembly put in a lot of effort. Does it work out? Kind of. You do have varied armies. Certainly, you do have choices. You do have consequences for those choices. My issue with Gelt and what prevents him from being a superb campaign, though it certainly can be a really fun campaign, but my issue with Gelt is that the early game certainly always feels very similar, regardless of how many times you play him. Like, how many turns you're going to spend in Cathay. It's not even a question of whether or not you want to cheese that. Just playing it normally just has you dealing with 6-7 plus turns of just spending in Cathay, dealing with a minor faction that's not really a threat to you, not really interesting. That does degrade the campaign experience from my perspective. However, those Cataclysm spells, the power of mages, unlimited mages, just the sheer amount of power you have in this campaign, and also the climate variety that you do have in a campaign as Balthazar Gelt. Some people have jungle. Gelt has mountains. That is a really good choice of a climate, considering especially how many mountains there are surrounding Gelt's starting position, and also how many mountains surround the Empire itself, if you choose to go back there. Not quite on the same level of Karl Franz, but certainly a worthy campaign as well. Then we have Marcus Wolfhard. This is a Daniel tier campaign, the worst Empire campaign right now. Never been a great campaign. was a bit better when Immortal Empires came out, just because of how horrible Karl Franz, for instance, was, or any Imperial campaign, how broken Imperial Authority used to be, not how it is right now. But this campaign is really outdated. The DLC is not worth it in any way, shape, or form. The units, the lore, etc. There's very little in this DLC that's actually worth getting at the moment compared to, say, Thrones of Decay. Hell, I'd probably pick Grim and the Grave because the Knights of the Blazing Sun are a more interesting unit than many of the stuff that you can get over here. Just not really worth it at this time. A lot of the changes in terms of unit recruitment that the Empire gets nowadays do make this DLC less worth it. And to be clear, to be certain, I'm not judging based on the value of the DLC, I'm judging it based on the value of campaign. And one of the things that really hurts Marcus Wolfhard is the fact he's stuck in the middle of a freaking jungle. That alone is horrible, but he has the worst jungle campaign in the game between the climate situation, the campaign limitations, the campaign mechanics. It really is not a campaign worth playing. Then you have Volkmar, F-tier campaign, better than Marcus Wolfhard. He's not horrible, except the Books and Gash system not being great at all. But Volkmar does actually have a decent amount of climate options available in his campaign, so you could play around with that. The problem is the Book of Nagash system is just a really outdated and broken system in a lot of ways in itself. And the fact that that's Volkmar's main campaign mechanic right now doesn't do him any favors. I would not recommend this campaign unless you really like the Khemri Thunderdome. And I'm not sure how many people like the Nehekara Thunderdome. I guess it could be interesting to deal with that situation in a couple of campaigns, but there's better legendary lords to deal with that, including freaking Manfred, which is saying a lot. Then you have Elspeth. I'm gonna put Elspeth in B tier. I think she's a perfectly fine legendary lord, so is Geld, so is Karl Franz. My issue with Elspeth is just how fluff this campaign feels in terms of the unique mechanics. Like, oh, you get teleportation and you get extra gunpowder units. That's great. How much does it matter? Well, consider this. In a Karl Franz campaign, you do have various choices, various paths, and they're all very viable. In Elspeth, you have one really good path and everything else is fluff. You can go do other things, but really are the hard counter to Vlad. So just rushing Drakenhof, taking out Vlad, dealing with that, and then just running around doing absolutely nothing of consequence is essentially what this campaign is all about. I think that what really sets Karl apart in a lot of ways is that he does have that guaranteed confederation from distance. Elspeth doesn't. And also her whole schematics gimmick. Like, you're a hard counter to vampires, but you actually benefit from going after your fellow humans in a campaign. I'm not joking. Elspeth benefits so much from schematics that conquering the Empire, Talabayim, Averheim, Stirland, etc., is actually one of the better choices. It's just kind of not the greatest campaign dynamic in a way, because like she's the defender of the Empire. Well, defender of the Empire, my ass. She's really out there to slaughter the whole lot of them. I just don't really care necessarily about campaigns that are all about, ooh, you get combat power and a teleportation every couple of turns. That's why Elspeth is on offer. Whereas Gelt, yeah, he has a lot of combat power, but he also has a bunch of campaign abilities, healing for an army, replenishment movement for an army, stock stats. Like, there's a lot of things to like about Gelt and the tactical strategic possibilities on the campaign map as opposed to just battles. But he also has plenty of things in battles as well, whereas Elspeth is largely about the battles. She does have some campaign benefits, but the main benefits are going to be in the battle. And I just don't think that's really as good, especially given the way campaigns are at the moment in terms of pacing, etc. And it would be a more interesting campaign if she actually had any risk, but she doesn't. She's in a fairly secure position. She doesn't have many enemies, and the enemies she does have, Vlad, she can easily deal with. So that does make it a lesser campaign from my perspective. Moving on to the cast dwarves, we have Astrogoth Ironhand in A tier. Fairly solid campaign, not necessarily the most interesting campaign mechanics or unique campaign mechanics for him, just really the racial mechanics that sell all the cast dwarf campaigns. Astrogoth does have a decent amount of choice. Do you go north? Do you go south? Do you go east? Do you deal with Grimgor? Do you try and let others deal with Grimgor in your campaign? Those kind of choices are available. That, alongside his hero capacity does open up a fair amount of possibilities in his campaign. Not the best, however, because the best Chaos Dwarf campaign is by far and away Drazhov the Ashen. See, Chaos Dwarves are designed around the idea of the slow build-up. While I don't necessarily think that works well within the meta as a race, and I think some balancing is in order with regards to that, I do genuinely believe that Drazhov does fit as a Chaos Dwarf far more so than the other two. He has a fairly interesting campaign with a dynamic starting position, different choices to be made in that starting position, and he is the master of industry and unit capacity in his campaign in a way that far surpasses anything that Astragoth or Zeytan can offer. Also, I gotta say this about hybrid caster melee lords. Usually, a lot of lords that have magic, but also a melee skill line, you're usually better off focusing on the melee skill line. But with Drazhov, it's kind of the exact opposite. You can focus on that, but he has exceptional magic, and I think it really shows you how a mage hybrid lord, who's also a fairly strong melee combatant, should work. I mean, heck, Elspeth is a fairly strong combatant, and she doesn't even have a melee skill line. She just has her special skill line and her magical skill line. But beyond that, just the dynamic starting position, the way he works within the context of the race, the overall location of the Darklands, and the choices he does have. Chaos Dwarves do have every climate available to them, and I kind of wish more campaigns had that available to them. Certainly some pacing issues overall with Chaos Dwarves, but still, Drazhov is a really fun campaign. The one I've personally played the most. I think he is the most popular Chaos Dwarf campaign for a reason. Actually, I think the Chaos Dwarves, the way they are in Warhammer 3, they're based on Drazhov's army in Tamarkan's book, or the whole events surrounding Tamarkan, because Drazhov did fight alongside Tamarkan to try and take Khorne, and then he abandoned them when things started to go south. Anyway, then you have Zeytan the Black. I think that's an F tier campaign. Zeytan is a pretty powerful legendary lord. His faction effects are fairly strong, so those aren't the issue. Well, the problem in Zeytan's campaign, he starts with the tier 1 tower, which is a significant downside in a Chaos Dwarf campaign because what it takes to level up that tower, so he's going to have more limited unit recruitment, more limited hero capacity, and he's going to have the slowest campaign. Certainly a good amount of long-term potential, but it is certainly a drag. Not a great starting dynamic to deal with because you got Grimgor on your backside, but you want to go forward towards Cathay. Just not really great campaign in Immortal Empires. Kind of a shame. I think Zeytan can be a very interesting and powerful legendary lord. He does certainly have a very fun quest battle with Sporticus and Grimgor, but it's just not really the greatest campaign in Immortal Empires. So this is the first Chaos Dwarf campaign I actually completed, but just a pain trying to replay it. He does have more caravans, he does have a lot of potential, undeniably so. I just don't think it works as well as either Astragoth or Drazhov, and I just think in general it's not really a great campaign to play. Then we have Forgrim. Forgrim Grudgebearer, A-tier campaign, generic lord of the Dwarves, or as much of a generic lord for the Dwarves as you're gonna get. Fairly dynamic starting position in that location where you're between the Badlands and the Darklands. You're gonna have to deal with Tzeentch, you're gonna have to deal with Skarsnik, you may have to deal with Azag, you're gonna have to deal with Gorbad, you may have to deal with Scrag. Lots of potential enemies in this starting position. Lots of things to do. Hero capacity, lots of power, lots of quest battle. Just a really solid, fun campaign. Even though it is a limited start, it just works fairly well as a campaign. Not the best, as I see it, but still a fairly solid campaign. Then we have Ungrim. Not quite as good, too safe from my perspective. Yes, you may have Vlad, and you may have, and you'll certainly have Azag, but I just think Ungrim's campaign, although substantially better than where it was before the release of Thrones Decay, just doesn't have that necessarily special edge to it as a campaign to really make it to a higher tier. But certainly a playable campaign. If you want to play a Slayer campaign, this is the one to go for. Not Malachi, for instance, or any other campaign. This is the one you want to play if you're looking for that kind of Slayer playstyle. Then we have Malachi Makason, easily the best campaign in the entire game. Just lots of enemies, lots of power, lots of a fairly dynamic campaign, partly because the racial mechanics of the dwarves do push you towards that, partly because of his own personal adventures, just adding on top of that, and then you have a very vulnerable starting position where you're just swarmed by enemies on all sides, and the addition of Arbol close enough to you does certainly complicate things, but in a good way, See, a great legendary lord is one that has a lot of tools available, but is actually forced to use those tools. That's one of the issues I have with, say, Elspeth, for instance. She has a great toolkit, but do you ever really need to use it? You can argue that you can win Malachai's campaign with just gyrocopters. Sure. Yes, but I think that's underselling just what you can do in this campaign and what you may be forced to do in Malachai's campaign. Then we have Belegar. I think Belegar is a C-tier campaign. Certainly it works far better than you might think, and certainly not as difficult as other people believe. But it's just one of those very frustrating campaigns. In fact, I'm going to put it in D tier. Either being forced to screw yourself over by rushing for settlement across multiple provinces and Caracade Peaks and losing a lot in the process and putting yourself in a very vulnerable position, or doing the smart thing, which is to take Athel, Lauren, Skaven Blight, etc., but playing that campaign with plus 50% upkeep plainly sucks. Just not really a great faction mechanic. Belegar is a great legendary lord in terms of his lord effects, what he's offering. He's great to confederate. But actually playing this campaign, I've played it multiple times, especially when CA buffed the AI. It can be a good amount of fun, but it's always that certain element of frustration that you will absolutely experience in Belegar's campaign. Then we have Grombrindle. Grombrindle is a really good legendary lord, undeniably so, but I think he's in the broken tier. What do I mean by that? Grombrindle is a campaign that you can have fun once in a while if you just want to curb stomp everyone around the map, and you certainly will. But he is too linear, too one-dimensional in what his campaign objectives are. You're always going to do the same thing, which is beat on Malekith. You will do so very, very easily. And then you'll build a very vast empire across the world because you have a ridiculous blue skill line, you have a ridiculous special skill line, you have so much campaign movement range, you're just zipping around with every single army in this campaign, but especially Grombrindle's army, you're just zipping around the entire campaign map, conquering territory with speed that other people can't match. It is an absurd campaign. Ever since they reworked the Dwarfs. Before they reworked the Dwarves, I would say this was the only Dwarf campaign that was really worth playing, that wasn't pain and suffering. But with the changes to the Dwarves, Grombrindle has just ascended to broken tier. Can be fun, a couple of times to be sure, but I think there's just a bit too much bullshittery going on in this campaign to really put it in anything other than the broken tier. Like, you could consider it an S tier or an A tier campaign, certainly he has the strength for it, but maybe a bit too much. Winning too much. We're winning too much over there. Then we have Forik Ironbrow. I think this is an F tier campaign easily. Like, as much as I like the Dwarves, just having a campaign where you're focusing on jungle in itself sucks. Fork's unique campaign objective with the relics and all that just feels fluff, redundant, and just annoying to have to deal with. It's not the Book of Nagash system, thankfully, but it's not really a great campaign system either, from my point of view. Then there's Grimgor, getting to the Greenskins, S-tier campaign easily. When I think of a Greenskin in Total War, or when I think of a Greenskin in Warhammer, I picture something like Grimgor, a big, bad brute that's gonna fight everyone and win anyone, and genuinely scary, and I think he really lives up to that reputation. See, there are a few things that terrify me in an Immortal Empires campaign when I'm playing on Legendary, because obviously I've played thousands of hours, but Grimgor does genuinely terrify me. If you're not terrified at all when you're playing against this guy, especially on higher difficulties, and he's throwing 4, 5, 6, 7 armies against you one after another, geez, I don't know what to tell you. He is a tide of death and destruction. I think it's very thematic for the Greenskins, especially the Orc playstyle in particular. That does work very well. He does get Black Orc benefits. He gets Black Orc Big Bosses benefits. He can recruit more of those than anyone else. He does have the big fort. He can take Zarnagrum very quickly without cheesing your ass off. What do I mean by that? Other people can take Zarnagrum, but there's usually some kind of You can cheese the actual siege battle, but Grimoire doesn't need to cheese the actual siege battle. He can defeat the freaking armies of Nurgle on the field of battle fairly early on. And that's not something many people can say. Like, you can do it with Arbol, but let me tell you, between Grimoire and Arbol, Grimoire has a much, much easier time in his campaign. And make no mistake, Arbol is absolutely a great legendary lord in his own right. But yeah, Grimoire is just a lot of power, and it's a lot of fun. Like, you do have foes. You have Tamarkan, you have Kolek, you have the Castors to deal with in a campaign. Hell, you have the new Greases, who can be a bit annoying to deal with, I'm not gonna lie on that subject, but there are certainly a good amount of threats to fight over here in a Grimoire campaign, but you're the biggest, baddest of them all. You're the best. Well, not necessarily the best, but still, you get the point. Then we have Skarsnik. I think this went from being one of the worst campaigns in the game, alongside Ungrim, to being a really solid one. If you want to play a Goblin campaign, this is the one to go for, as far as I see it. The starting position can be a bit safe. You do have a fairly straightforward path with being a Forgrim, taking his stuff, but then there's the interesting stuff that does happen in the Battlelands, and as far as the Caracade Peaks campaigns go, be it him, Queek, or Belagar, I think this is, in a lot of ways, the most interesting Caracade Peaks campaign. Because you do want Caracade Peaks. Queek doesn't necessarily care about it. Belagar is too far away to really make it work in a solid way. But with Skarsnik, you can make it work. I really like the fact that they changed the way he recruits orcs. So you might focus on goblins early on, but then you can recruit orcs from every settlement as long as you hold Caracade Peaks. And look, let me just say it as plainly as possible. Stalking armies are fun. I think Skarsnik should have had the ability of having stock armies from the very beginning. He starts with his own army having stock stands, and he can get stock stands on every other army in his campaign if he takes and holds Caracade Peaks. Really fun campaign in a lot of ways, just it's not Grimoire. I'll leave it there. Then we have Gorbad Ironclaw. I'm sure I'm going to be criticized heavily for this. So, my perspective on Gorbad, I think his starting position and himself as a legendary lord in terms of his skill line, his lord effects, etc., those are great. Very fun, interesting starting position. But his faction mechanics, I think it's a bit unfair, though. I'm going to put him in B tier. I just don't think he has any worthwhile faction mechanics except like global recruitment. The whole plan thing, maybe CA does change it and rebalance. It just feels like a lot of fluff. Oh, you can get the variety of units. Doesn't matter. Really. Do you need it? No. Does it actually benefit you to go for that variety? Not really. Kind of. Depends on what you're going for, but not really. So is the plan achieving its objective? No. Is it a fun and interesting campaign mechanic? Absolutely fucking not. But does he have a fun and engaging campaign? If you ignore that, yeah, he does have. He has a fairly interesting starting position where you do have a lot on your freaking plate. And how you deal with that makes the campaign interesting, as far as I see it. I think just, yeah, I don't understand what the heck they were trying to do with the faction mechanics over here. But just because he's a greenskin, he does have a good lord skill line. That does make his campaign work, but yeah, his campaign mechanic, his unique faction mechanics, you can throw them in trash and ignore them and still have a pretty decent time. Then we have Azag the Slaughterer. I think Azag, I mean, he's kind of generic orc lore. Like, Grimoire is all about the black orcs. Azag is kind of like all-purpose orcs, but he's kind of like as close to a master diplomat, because you get good relations with the vampires, you can get good relations with Kislev. It's kind of freaking hilarious to ally Catherine when you're playing a greenskin in a campaign like this. You might have to fight the dwarves and Empire, but funnily enough, you do have the entire Empire and the Dwarven lands, Darklands. You have a good, solid selection of climate. You're in such a position that you can go beat up other legendary lords of the Greenskins, including Grimoire, and just take all their stuff. So if Grimoire conquers the entire mountains and more, you can just show up, beat them up, and take all of that. It belongs to Azag now. Or really Nagash. It's Nagash cosplaying as a Greenskin. Maybe this is the only Nagash campaign we'll ever get. It's pretty solid. It's a lot better than a lot of people give it credit for. I think a lot of people are just not sold on the character design, but as far as the campaign goes, from a gameplay perspective, it just works in a lot of ways. And as long as a campaign works, I think that's solid. It's certainly not an S-tier campaign, but it's a lot better of a campaign than you might think, and I certainly believe that at least Azag has something interesting going that's unique to him, which is not something I can necessarily say for good or bad. Warzag, solid Savage Orc playstyle, not necessarily as great as the others. Just starting in jungle, always gonna limit you. Starting in Hikaru, always gonna limit you. Starting in Kairos, always gonna limit you. Despite that, I think he is the best jungle campaign in the game, but the jungle is still pretty crap to deal with. Just so many terrain issues, terrain design issues, slow speed, etc, etc, etc. But Warzag does have a fairly nice playstyle. You get Rogue Idols at tier 3, that is freaking fun. He makes the Savage Orc playstyle work very well, and with the addition of the Savage Orc Great Shaman, it is a much better campaign from that perspective. Savage Orcs always felt like you had a reason to recruit the Savage Orc army for Warzag, but there was never really a reason to do so for any other army. But now you do have a reason because of all the Savage Orc benefits you can get if you have an army led by a Savage Orc Great Shaman. I do feel the pain of them having limited Shaman recruitment at or increased capacity at tier 4. Then we have Grom. D tier campaign suffers from similar issues similar to a Belegar campaign, just in a different way. Before the Greenskin economy nerf, you could make it work with Grom, but now he's starting with climate all around him that is not pleasant. And yes, you can make all of Wolf one. Great, you have an island in the middle of the ocean that's suitable climate, but everything else around you for a fairly long distance is not. And that is a pretty big problem, especially considering where this campaign is going to push you to go, which is to conquer Wolf 1, and then it's like, oh, I conquer Wolf 1, what next? Well, there's no next. That's it. So it's a one-note campaign as far as I see it. And also his faction mechanics, like apparently the hag that's supposed to spawn with cooking doesn't work properly anymore. I've certainly noticed it modded on modded. Yes, Celia is aware of that. There's just bugs and issues with that. Like, I think they should have updated this campaign a while ago. It always had issues in Immortal Empires because of the starting position, but you could just make up for that with the inherent strengths of the Greenskins. Now, I just think it's an outdated campaign. Very good campaign when it was released, not necessarily so much right now. Getting to the vampire counts, yeah, Manfred is... I don't think I'm going to put him in F, but I am sorely no, I'm going to put him in F. Should I? I mean, I would have every reason to put him in Daniel tier from just how the community feels about freaking Manfred. I'll put him in F tier just because the Books in a Gash system, which is his unique campaign mechanic, is a really crappy system. Yeah. I do discount a lot of points for that. Manfred is not horrible, but he's kind of on a similar level to Volkmar. In the sense, he has a campaign mechanic that works. He has a race that works very well, but just like the mechanic he has, even though it works, it's a frustrating piece of shit to engage in. And that is my sentiment on the Books in Gash, and yes, it does ruin every campaign that has to deal with that entire fucking system. So it ruins Volkmar, it ruins Manfred. I don't think Manfred was ever really a great Legendary Lord to begin with, even before it really sunk in how detestable of a character this guy is. But yeah, now just, it works. Vampire counts do work fairly well as a race within the context of Warhammer 3, but he's not really that great to play. Then we have Kemmler. I think I'm going to put Kemmler in... where to put Kemmler? So I think Kemmler is kind of B-tier campaign, maybe even higher than that. I think he has a good amount of diplomatic options. He can get the Red Duke fairly early on in his campaign. He does have a significant number of advantages, diplomatic advantages, terrain advantages, faction effects advantages. It's no Vlad, sure, but it can work much better than people give it credit for. A lot of people dismiss how good Kemmler can be in a campaign, but he can be really, really solid. You might have to cheese it with the Red Duke to get access to him, one way or another, like Rebellion or cheesing the Confederation, but it is a campaign that works. It's interesting to think about the vampire counts, because they only got one DLC and just a couple of updates, the most significant one coming alongside the Vampire Coast. And yet they are a race that have stood the test of time. In fact, I would dare say that in Warhammer 3, they play the best that they've ever been. It just goes to show you that sometimes you can have a race that CA has not updated in a very long time that just works. Don't get me wrong, I would like an update for vampire counts. I do think they do need one. Just more interesting stuff to have in a campaign, more so than anything else. Like, this is one of the few races like, a rework would be nice. Research tree stuff and all that. Certain building tiers, but as far as races go that haven't been updated, they are genuinely the best race in the game. Because they don't need necessarily an update to have a good enough time. It would be welcome, though. Don't get me wrong on that. Then we have Vlad and Isabella, solid 8-tier campaign. The best vampire counts campaign in the game by far, regardless of which one you play. I'd probably recommend choosing Isabella as the Legendary Lord. I do think that's a bit of a weird one. If they rework vampire counts, I just kind of feel that we shouldn't have that choice and they should just be merged and have both. I don't know exactly how you do it. Or have a choice between which faction effects. Like, Vlad is the faction leader. It's just a question of which faction effects you're going to get, ultimately. Then we have Gorst. I could put Gorst in Broken. His zombies are ridiculously cheap and powerful, but I think it's an F-tier campaign. It's such a dull playstyle to play with zombies. It works. Yes, I don't dispute that it works. I don't dispute that vampire counts work. I don't dispute that Gorst faction effects, Lord effects, and all that are very powerful. But it's watching paint dry. Exactly. Like, literally, you can AFK so many battles in this and you'll still win that. I mean, granted, a lot of vampire counts battles can be like that, but this is like the worst one by far in a lot of ways. Manfred gets ruined by the Vux of Nagash. He would be much higher if not for that. But Gorst just gets ruined because while his faction mechanics do work and they're not a complete pain in the ass to deal with, they're also freaking dull as hell to deal with. That's where I stand on that. I don't think I'm wrong on it. You can, enjoy it once or twice, just unleashing the zombie horde once or twice, but that's about it. Then we have the Beastmen. Look, here's how I'm going to do the Beastmen. I think Tarks is a B-tier campaign and all the others are D tier. They're not bad Legendary Lords, they're just not really special. I think Beastmen, they do work. Their rework in Warhammer 2 worked very well for that game because diplomacy in Warhammer 2 was an iffy question. But diplomacy works fairly well, much better as a system in Warhammer 3. But Beastmen don't have that. They don't interact with a lot of systems that the game has improved on. Also, their campaign pacing issues where they start out in a limited fashion, not necessarily weak, but they do start in a limited fashion and they have to spend a lot of turns to get to have unit variety, campaign variety, just kind of ruins them. I think the fact that they're using Dread for everything, Chaos Dwarves use multiple resources, right? Beastmen use one resource for everything. Unit caps, hero capacity, hero rank, army rank. It kind of gets tedious. The only thing you get for money is items, and it's just kind of one-note campaigns. I think Tarks is more interesting because at least he has that whole rampage mechanic, but the other ones, again, not horrible, can be fun a couple of times. Basically anything above F tier is worth playing at least a couple of times. I think F tier is just not worth playing at all. But it's just, they're just not great campaigns. They're good enough strength-wise, but just not great. Then we have Bretonnia. Oh, man. Where to put Bretonnia? See, I think in terms of individual Legendary Lords, I think Lewin just barely edges over F tier, or should I put them in F tier? I think it's an awful campaign. The terrain of Bretonnia is not particularly great in a lot of ways, but it can work. It's just a pain in the neck to deal with. But at least it's workable, and it's not the most horrible experience in the game. Albric is Daniel tier. Like, it's kind of hilarious, actually, when you think about it. Albric is not horrible Legendary Lord, but he's also the least interesting Bretonnian Legendary Lord to play. He does have access to knights far earlier than the others, but he's also stuck in fucking Lustria with cavalry. I don't need to say more on that subject. Like, Albric is a joke of Legendary Lord, not worth playing. Fey Enchantress, yeah, F tier campaign. I think I have a better opinion of Bretonnia as a race than I do of individual Bretonnian Legendary Lords. Like, I think the Fey Enchantress is the most ridiculously nonsensical Legendary Lord in the game, in the sense that she just doesn't really feel like a Legendary Lord. Like, her faction effects are whatever, her skill line is whatever, herself, she's whatever, her starting position, not really that great, the campaign she plays, not really that fucking great. either. Then we have Rapunzel. I think Rapunzel works much better. She does have Knights Errant available fairly early on in her campaign. Yes, she's stuck in the Nehekara, the Thunderdome, but she doesn't have the same limitation on vows that others have. Like, that's one of the things that ruins Lewin's campaign for me in a significant way. Because she has much easier access to vows because of where she actually starts. Yes, the vow system does need a rework in Bretonnian campaigns as far as I see it. But if you're looking to play a Bretonnian campaign, this is the one I'd recommend. In fact, as far as I see it, this is the only one that's actually worth playing. Lewin is just kind of at the edge between D and F tier. I think you can enjoy it to a certain degree. It's not as horrible as the other ones in F tier, but yeah, it's not great either. Whereas I think Rapunzel is solid enough to actually work. And she can have an interesting enough campaign as well. Choices, consequences, etc. She doesn't have the limitations that others have. Also, that research tree on Confederation, holy shit, does that suck in Bretonnian campaigns. You know, hilariously enough, Albrecht actually has a good system, situation with vows, but yeah, he's in a fucking jungle. Screw Illustria. Genuinely one of the worst campaign areas. I'm not sure what's worse, the Southlands, where you have fucking Hyros or Oxyadol, or Illustria itself. You guys let me know on that subject. Then we have the Wood Elves. I think all of them are in the broken tier. All the Wood Elves are in the broken tier. And the reason I say they're all in the broken tier comes down to this. I think all Wood Elves are very strong Legendary Lords. I think there's a good amount of variety in their campaigns in the game. Orion has unlimited armies. Durfu has Wallbreaker. The Sisters have flying gunships with cruise missiles. And Draika is all about the malevolent tree spirits. But the Wood Elves are absurdly broken as a race in such a way that I just don't think they're really that replayable, and I think their campaigns just end up being an enter and button simulator. Maybe with the exception of Draika, but if I'm being really generous with Draika, I'd put her in B tier. But still, just for me, like, it's the amount of replayability you're going to have in Wood Elven campaign is going to be fairly limited. You're too safe. You're too secure. You're not risking anything. That is a significant downside. To be sure, other campaigns you can become unbreakable very quickly, but at least you know you've risked something together. Wood Elves just win by default, and that's not fucking fun. Then we have Norsca. Yeah, I'm not even going to pretend that it's anything other than this. Norsca is Daniel tier. I'm not going to say anything on that. Broken campaign system, limited roster of units, broken mechanics, horrible bloated research tree, legendary lords that don't feel like they do in the lore. Like, Wulfric should have teleportation. Of all the characters in the fucking game that should have teleportation, Wulfric is the one who should have it. And he doesn't. It's a Warhammer 1 race and Warhammer 3. What more do you want me to say? So Norsca is Daniel tier. Maybe even more Daniel tier than freaking Daniel in certain ways. And that should tell you quite a bit, I feel, from my perspective. Trog also is an insult to his character, because you look at Trog in the lore, he's actually an intelligent troll. He's not some stupid monster that they made him in the game. So neither of these legendary lords feels thematic or appropriate to what they are in the actual fucking lore. Neither of these play as they should in an interesting way. So I think Norsca is both a horrible race with horrible legendary lords with tons of issues that they've had since Warhammer 1 that CA has never fixed. They need a rework. Of all the races in the game that desperately need the rework, Norsca needs it. Will CA give it to them? I don't know. I don't necessarily think it's a priority. I wish they would give it to them. Like, just add one more legendary lord or two. You know, one paid, one free. Give us a solid Norsca experience, creative assembly, and then maybe consider how more powerful Norsca is going to impact everyone else. Because that's one of the things I would criticize about creative assembly. They might make some legendary lords better, and then they ignore the fact that it ruins other campaigns. Just worth saying that. Switching over to the High Elves. Well, High Elves are a fairly broken and balanced race that does absolutely need a rework. But individual campaigns can still be fun. Hilariously enough, though, the best Elven campaigns are the free ones, not the paid DLC ones. So we start with Tyrion. I think if you're a new player in particular, Tyrion is the best place to start. Don't get me wrong, Karl Franz is a great campaign, can be good for beginners that really want to go on the deep end of things, but if you want just a safe and secure location while still learning the mechanics of the game, this is probably where I'd start. You have a solid, strong army baseline without any DLC. Spearmen, archers, a noble you can recruit, a mage you start with, a starting position that does offer some variety. It's a great starting campaign, and that's the reason I'm going to put it in A tier. Not every campaign has to be for people like me. Tyrion is a good campaign for a significant portion of the player base. And I think he has a significant amount of potential in the long term. He also is not ridiculously broken in some ways. Others are, either for good or bad, in the sense that some campaigns are broken and give you an absurd level of power. Other campaigns are broken in the sense that they're awful to play. Tyrion just kind of manages to weave in between those two extremes while being a really solid campaign, especially for beginner players and without owning any DLC. And I think those are all worthwhile qualities, because I can say a lot of things about other campaigns on this list. I would not necessarily play Karl Franz if I didn't own Franz the King. I would, however, argue that Tyrion is worth playing, even if you don't own any of the High Elven DLCs, and that is actually a fairly rare situation these days. So really good campaign, despite some of the significant issues that the High Elves do have. Then we have Teclis. Oh dear. You know what's worse than having a jungle campaign? Having two jungle campaigns in one. See, Teclis, his short campaign victory conditions are the Southern Cast Waste and the Southlands. His long campaign victory conditions are about Lustria. And if that sounds awful to you, it's because it freaking is. His faction mechanics are horrible. His climate capability is horrible. You can go for Ulthuan if you want, I suppose. But chances are by the time you can get to Ulthuan, your campaign is kind of getting to that grindy stage in it. And even if you can get to Ulthuan, you might not be able to take anything in Ulthuan whatsoever, because you will be denied it, because Tyrion, Alariel, Elfarion will control it. Most of the time, High Elves win the Ulthuan race. Very rarely do I see them, on any difficulty, losing that. It can happen. I don't dispute that. It can happen, but it's very freaking rare. Then we have Alariel. Alariel is an absolutely freaking broken campaign. Like, instant construction, free construction, insane levels of growth, and just complete bullshittery. Also broken campaign mechanics in the sense that you ignored them and they don't work, they bug out. But she's not Daniel tier, certainly. She's just absurdly strong. If you just want to dominate with High Elves, this is the campaign for you, but she is ridiculously, stupidly powerful. Like, let me take the Sword of Cain and negate all the downsides of the Sword of Cain in my campaign and just get all the upsides of having the Sword of Cain. That is Alariel in a nutshell. I cannot recommend playing this campaign. I think Queen of the Crone is badly regarded by the community as a whole for a damn reason. Then we have Alifanar. Certainly a one-note campaign, but he's actually really solid for what he is. And it's not like he has an easy time of it either. See, he does have limited climate, absolutely. So replayability is going to suffer. Long-term campaign possibilities are going to suffer. But for what it is, honestly, I think I would say Alifanar is even an A-tier campaign. If you own Queen and the Crone to get Shadow Warriors, rather. But the thing about Alifanar, stock stance, underway stance, a starting position that offers a huge amount of possibilities. Again, not necessarily the most long-term capabilities, so I'm tempted to put him in B tier. I think B tier does suit him better, but probably the best B tier campaign in the game by quite a long shot. Him and Warzag. But still, limitations on long-term, but really, really solid campaign to play at least a couple of times from my perspective. Then we have Emmerich, also kind of a B-tier campaign, or maybe an A-tier. Like, dragons can be fun. He does have a dynamic starting position. He can get the tier 4 element just by conquering and not by abusing anything else, though he can certainly abuse other things. Like, that's the thing. There are cheese mechanics in the game that you can abuse. The question is, do you need to? Well, you don't need to necessarily in an Emmerich campaign. you do have a solid enough climate between wasteland and mountains and, yes, Ulthuan itself. You might not be conquering Nargothrond anytime soon. The long campaign victory conditions do suck, so they'd suck in a Leaf and Arse campaign. They suck in Tyrion's campaign as well, but Tyrion has that benefit of being really, really good for beginner players. Then we have Elfarion, yeah, C tier. I really wish Elfarion was better, but it's just grind central in this campaign. Fight as many battles manually as you can against lords to capture them, because that's one of your main campaign mechanics. Oh, you get special units in this campaign. That's good, but you're screwed over by climate. Oh, you want to go beyond Ulthuan in the donut by holding it? Tough luck. You get screwed by climate. Oh, you want to go into the balance, focus on that? Tough luck. You get screwed by the mountain climate. Like, it's the worst of both worlds, because you just don't have enough climate viability to really make it work. And while it's not the worst for High Elves, I just feel this campaign is not really necessarily interesting. Very abusable campaign as well, which, yes, that is going to degrade it from my perspective. Then we have Malekith as a campaign. I think Malekith is probably a B tier campaign. Not horrible, just not necessarily that special as far as I see it, of a campaign from my personal perspective. Can work, can be solid enough of introduction to the Dark Elves, but just not really the greatest Dark Elf campaign. Morathi, ooh, she's an S tier campaign. Lots of diplomatic capabilities, lots of variety of available in this campaign in terms of where you're going, how you're going about it. You might be limited by climate, but you have so much money and so many heroes, you will not give a shit. Really, I'm not joking on that. Whereas with Malekith, it kind of feels you need to cheese. With Morathi, cheesing is optional. Morathi is a walking, talking cheese of a campaign in herself. Really solid campaign. I think the best Dark Elven campaign in the game. Then we have Hellebrand. Not the worst campaign. Not as and certainly not the painful experience they might have with the Belegar or Braum campaign, but just not really that special. There's not much more to say about that. Just not really a special campaign. It works. It works much better than you might think, but just not really that special. Lokir. I think Lokir is an A tier. I wouldn't put him in S tier. He does have a very strong early game, but he kind of suffers on a longer term campaign, and some of the terrain issues he does have do hurt him a bit. He just doesn't get to the same ridiculous nonsense that Morathi does, which honestly I could probably argue Morathi deserves to be put in the broken tier. But here's the thing. You kind of have to go, kind of have to work for it for Morathi to do it, so you don't have to work for it if you're Pringle and Brindle. For Ilariel, you could play her normally, sure, but you can also abuse it and become ridiculously powerful. It was Morathi, she's just solid enough without being ridiculous about it. Malice Darkblade, yeah, F tier campaign, just boring. I mean, I guess I'll be a bit more kind to Malice Darkblade than put him D tier, but just not really a great campaign, I feel. Like, it's kind of crazy. You do have unique objectives in this campaign. You do have very strong lord. You do have possibilities. So it should be much higher, but I don't know. It just doesn't work for me. I guess the best way I could describe Malice Darkblade's campaign is he feels really, really dull. Then we have Rakarth. I don't need to say anything on this beyond the fact another Lustria campaign. Yes, there will be a lot of Lustria campaigns in F tier and Daniel tier. And speaking about Lustria, we have Mazdamundi. Yeah, he's freaking Daniel tier. Generic lord for Lizardmen, weak race, horrible lord, horrible campaign to play, severe limitations, not thematic at all for what the lord should be in the lord. So yeah, it just goes over there in Daniel tier. Krokar, a bit better, but still F tier. Not gonna say it. Cult of Sotek, I guess that goes into the broken tier. Just, he does have a lot of power, an enormous level of power. He also breaks the freaking game. Tic-Tac-Toe, yeah, also an F tier. I'm sorry, it's just like miserable campaign in a lot of ways. Just not really that special. Gorok, D tier, much better to play than a lot of other Lizardman campaigns. He does start with a walking, talking nuclear weapon, but it's also a fucking Lustria campaign, so make of that what you will. Nakai, I think I'm gonna be really harsh towards Nakai and saying it's a Daniel tier campaign. It's just like really fucking awful pacing in the campaign, severe limitations. It does work. Yeah. Yeah, it does work. I guess it doesn't deserve an Daniel tier, but jeez, is it working hard to get it. Oxyatl, I think this used to be one of the best campaigns in the game, but I think that since we've gotten more campaigns with teleportation since then, and the Lizardmen have stayed the same without any improvements, yeah, I'm just going to drop it from what I would have put it previously as an S-tier campaign to a B-tier campaign. That's where I stand right now with regards to Oxyatl. Probably the best Lizardman campaign, but that's saying you're the best of a pile of garbage. It's still garbage in a lot of ways. He does have a far better campaign in the sense he doesn't have to deal with the jungle at all. Ever. You don't have to touch the jungle. You don't have to acknowledge the jungle exists. You don't have to pretend it exists. You don't have to engage in it. You don't have to talk to it. You can just completely ignore that entire side of the map and play in some of the best and most interesting campaign areas of the game. And that is a very solid win. He gets downgraded because of Lizardman issues. That is where I stand on that. Reaching the Skaven, this is gonna piss off quite a few people what I'm about to do. But I think Queek is an A-tier faction, really solid Caracade Peaks campaign. Though you don't necessarily need to take Caracade Peaks because you are strong enough as a Skaven, and as a Skaven generic lord, if you will, or as much as Queek is a generic lord. Really powerful duelist, fun campaign starting position, lots of possibilities in that position, and some other Skaven campaigns may have really good legendary lords, but their starting position sucks, or their campaign dynamic is just not that great. Queek, however, he has a really, really good starting position. Then we have Skrolk. Skrolk is a C-tier faction, comes down to Lustria. Like, as I said, every Lustrian campaign is going to be downgraded in this video for bloody good reasons. I'm just done with the whole Lustria thing, and I think a lot of people are done with the whole Lustria thing in general. Moving on to Tzeentch, yeah, Tzeentch is an F-tier campaign. Okay, I'm exaggerating. It's a D-tier campaign, or is it a D-tier campaign? Should I even consider Tzeentch a legendary lord? I don't know. On one hand, he's actually perfectly functional as a legendary lord. On the other hand, he's fucking Tzeentch. As much of a non-legendary lord as you're gonna get in terms of a playable faction, that is Tzeentch Craventail. The only thing that prevents him from being an F tier is, yeah, he's still a Skaven legendary lord, and Skaven are freaking awesome. So that is something to keep in mind. Then we have Ikeclaw. Oh man, the firing squads are gonna be out in force for this one. I'm gonna put Ikeclaw in C tier. Before you start typing furiously, let me explain. Ikeclaw is a great, amazing legendary lord. Great faction effect. So he does suffer from the same issue as Elspeth in a lot of ways, in the sense that it's just increasing your army power, whereas really the most interesting factions are the ones that give you possibilities on the campaign. But nuclear weapons are nuclear weapons, right? He does have a lot of fun on the campaign map as well, don't get me wrong. But here's the problem. The starting situation that Ikeclaw has to deal with just plainly fucking sucks. It sucks so much that I'll put it in Daniel tier in terms of starting positions in the game. One of the worst starting positions in the entire game that ruins the early game regardless of how you play Ikeclaw. Because I want to like this legendary lord. I think he's an incredibly awesome legendary lord to play in the Old World mod. I recommend the Old World Classic. It runs much better in terms of performance. But the problem is with Ikeclaw, just because every single time you're going to have that pure misery of a starting position, then yes, that does downgrade this campaign by quite a bit. It's that problem of starting position ruining an otherwise great legendary lord, and unlike Elfarion, Hellebrand, or Skrolk, Ikeclaw does not have some of the faction or racial issues that, Elfarion has with the race. Hellebrand, just not necessarily that interesting in certain ways. Skrolk gets ruined because of Lustria. Then we have Tzeentch. I think that Tzeentch is either an A tier or an S tier. Am I gonna get away with not putting a Skaven legendary lord? You know what? I think so. I think the problem is that Cathay is a really good starting position. You do have a lot of possibilities, but previously I would have called it an S tier campaign, but I think like as we get more and more racial reworks, you start realizing certain problems that, you know, were always there, but you just realize other races have pulled ahead other Legendary Lords. I think Tzeentch is a really good Skaven campaign in a lot of ways. Fun campaign effects, good starting position, dynamic starting position, not the pure misery that others are. Then we have Clan Molder. Same problem, really, that Ikeclaw has, just less pure misery than Ikeclaw. So I'm just going to put this one... in... Well, it's not the fun aspect of nuclear weapons, so I think I'm going to put Fraud in C tier as well. It has nothing to do with just filling up the B tier faction list. No, sir. To be quite blunt about it, though, I think it's better than Ikeclaw in terms of starting position, but faction-wise, Ikeclaw it has the better faction, he just has the worst starting position. So yeah, but even for different reasons. Then we get to the Tomb Kings. Oh boy. Katep, easy Daniel tier, really horrible campaign in a lot of ways. Well, just a first-ring campaign in a lot of ways. I mean, I'll be honest, like, all of them deserve Daniel tier. Like, just the Tomb Kings are completely crap right now, given the campaign pacing. They don't work well with that. They have to deal with the books and the gash. Katep has a really horrible starting position. Cetra is better from that perspective, so is Khalida. And actually, I don't understand why people think Khalida has a really hard campaign. I really don't see that, personally. I mean, she can have it, if you ignore everything that she can do to not have it. But yeah, the only Tomb King campaign that's quote-unquote playable is going to be Ark in the Black. Then we have the entire Vampire Coast. You know what? Here's what I'm going to do. If a race has all their Legendary Lords in a particular tier, I'm just going to remove them from this list. So that is exactly what I am going to do with the Wood Elves. And yeah, Vampire Coast, all of their Legendary Lords are Daniel tier, just really horrible racial design in a lot of ways, horrible uniroster, horrible campaign mechanics, horrible research tree, just everything that you can imagine wrong with a race, this particular race has it, and it does affect all their campaigns. That's not to say all campaigns are equally horrible. Some are better than others, but it's still like Daniel tier for every single Vampire Coast campaign. Like, having a really crappy unit roster does not help matters. Having really bad campaign mechanics doesn't help matters. Having Legendary Lords that don't feel all that special doesn't help matters. Then we get to Kislev. So with Kislev, I think Katrin is a Daniel tier campaign. I mean, I could put her in broken tier, but I really think she's a Daniel tier campaign, like just really fucking horrible campaign. Kastaltin ends up being an F tier campaign, just barely. I mean, he has a better starting city than Katrin. He does share many of the issues as Katrin. It's just not quite the same horrible nature as Katrin is. Then we have Astankia. She is absolutely a Daniel tier. Just, I really don't know what Creative Assembly was thinking with regards to this campaign. Just horrible design of a campaign. Then we have Boris Ursus. The best Kislev campaign in a lot of ways, because he's not dealing with Astankia's bullshit mechanics and limited unit roster until you get back to Kislev. And he also is not limited by the supporter system. So I'm going to put Boris Ursus in C tier. Then we have Cathay. Well, I think Yan Bo is... Where to put Yan Bo? I think Yan Bo is a C tier campaign as well, whereas Yao Ming and Miao Yang are D tier campaigns. I just think Cathay, between terrain issues, climate issues, just really horrible. Yan Bo is better, but while he is better, and Cathay is a perfectly functional race, it's just not an especially interesting one. But while Yan Bo is better, in quite a few ways, he does suffer from the Lustria syndrome, as I would call it. So yeah, Lustra just isn't a great location, but at least you do have more possibilities in this campaign than you do in Miao Ying or Xiao Ming's campaign. I'd recommend Immortal Empires Extended if you want to make things more interesting in terms of playing a Cathay campaign, but yeah, just not really a great situation to be dealing with in either Xiao Ming or Miao Ying campaign. And it is better, slightly, in a Yanbo campaign, just not necessarily that much. It's like limited replenishment, limitations on climate, Harmony system not being especially great either. Research tree is better, Grey Bastion system not great. You get the idea. And all Cathay campaigns feel very similar to one another, just Yanbo has extra mechanics, so that's the reason he gets a higher tier. Arriving at Khorne, we have Skarbrand. I think Skarbrand is a solid A-tier campaign. Not necessarily exceptional, but I think it gets the job done. I really hated Skarbrand beforehand. I felt it was a very one-dimensional campaign that was just purely reliant on cheese. I mean, if I was thinking about pre-patch Skarbrand, given the way that I've structured this tier list, I'd probably put him in broken pre-patch, but just really fucking tedious in a lot of ways. But now, I think he's an A-tier campaign, can be really solid. Between the cold teleportation you can get quite a lot of, and the various changes made to Khorne, it is a much better campaign overall. Arbol, S-tier campaign, really fun, really dynamic, second best campaign in the entire game at the moment as I see it. Just a really fun, dynamic campaign, lots of objectives, and I think one person who commented on one of my videos on the subject said it best. I played an entire Arbol campaign, and usually I look at the objectives to see how many settlements do I need to take in order to win the campaign, but with Arbol, I just didn't feel it. And I agree with that sentiment completely. Like, it is a really solidly designed campaign where you can genuinely have fun. Is it powerful? Yes. Maybe it is too powerful. Maybe. I can agree with that. Though you can choose to make it difficult, and you are risking something. Because if you lose a battle with Arbol, it's kind of GG well played. I mean, you don't lose the campaign, but that's kind of the whole intent of that entire campaign. Skulltaker, he just avoids F tier. I think Skulltaker is just not really well-designed campaign in a lot of ways. I think Lustra sucks. He does have teleportation, so he avoids some of the pitfalls of Lustra because of that. He does have the cold teleportation. He has faction teleportation, so he can kind of make it work, but it's still not really a great campaign when we're thinking over there of Lustra, really, in a lot of ways. Kairos Fate Weaver and the Changeling, both Daniel tier campaigns. Actually, no. So Kairos Fate Weaver is a Daniel tier campaign. Tzeentch does really suck in terms of its racial design at the moment, and Kairos does suffer from that. Whereas the Changeling, he's an absolutely broken campaign in the sense he works, he is very powerful, he is ridiculously bullshit. So Daniel tier are campaigns that are never worth fucking playing. The Changeling, I'm not sure if it's worth playing either. I personally play the ones that never played it fully. That is, again, obviously I've tried it several times since then, but just like, yeah, it's the intern button simulator campaign with extremely powerful armies. To be fair, the Changeling does resolve a lot of the issues Tzeentch has, but it's a nothing campaign, no risk campaign. So if that's what you're interested, yeah, you can go with the Changeling. It can work from that perspective. Nurgle. So we get to Nurgle. I'm sure some people are going to be disappointed by what I'm going to have to say on the subject of Nurgle. But with regards to Nurgle, I am going to put... I think that when you're thinking about Nurgle, I think Kugaf is a D-tier campaign. He works. He's not horrible. He's not especially miserable. You know, I'm going to put him in C tier because he's not especially miserable. It's just Nurgle is a bit too slow for the campaign pacing at the moment. Epidemius, yeah, F tier campaign, like useless Legendary Lord with the campaign mechanic that just flat doesn't work given the campaign pacing and his starting position. It's not a hard starting position, it's just a really boring one. It's like a really boring campaign with a Legendary Lord that might as well not have action effects for all they matter. Then we have Tamarkan. I think Tamarkan is a B tier campaign. Really great legendary lore, really good design. Just Nurgle campaign pacing does take him down a bit. But make no mistake, Tamarkan is an exceptionally good legendary lore. Lots of variety with the chieftains, lots of unit variety. Choices in the campaign, it's just like, yeah, Nurgle issues that do drag it down. Then we get to, and yes, I'm filling up these tiers very quickly. Then we get to Greece's gold, to the Ogres. I think Greases and, if I scroll down over here, Greases and Scrag are both A-tier campaigns, really solid legendary lords, really good redesign. While I do think Omens of Destruction is worth purchasing more if you're looking to play an Ogre campaign, just because you get extra units, extra content, I gotta say, I really think both Scrag and Greases have really good campaigns at the moment. And I think that the reason I put them in both of them in the same tier is because they're very different campaigns, different focuses on a campaign. Like Scrag is about magic, heroes, and meat. Greases is all about being the god of gold. But both of them do end up being really solid campaigns that do end up working in a lot of ways. Then we have Maneater, really great campaign, dynamic campaign, choose your own adventure campaign. Maybe I should put them in broken. I could understand the logic in that. But I just think Maneater does end up working in a campaign. And I think like Ogres were always supposed to be more like this mercenary faction that gets bought by people to do their bidding. I do think like CA does need to fix some of the balancing around him and make those contracts a bit more interesting. But the inherent design of him as a legendary lord combined with the Ogre rework does make for a much, much better campaign. Some people will argue it's too easy of a campaign, to be sure, but I think your choose your own objective campaign can be fairly interesting from my perspective. So I think like they really nailed what Maneater is supposed to be as a character in a lot of ways. Then we have Daniel. Daniel goes in Daniel tier, no explanation needed on that particular subject. Really awful legendary lore, just doesn't work all that well, doesn't have a great campaign in any way, shape, or form, just completely forgotten by Creative Assembly. Then we have Nakari. Yeah, I think Nakari is an F tier campaign easily, just lack of replenishment, units that are very easy to kill. One-dimensional campaign is like, oh, you conquer Ulfon. That can be fun once, and that's it. And then after that, you're steamrolling the game. So Nakari can be really powerful, but it's an incredibly tedious campaign because you're doing the same you're relying on your vassals to conquer the map for you. And it's very repetitive if you're looking to replay this campaign in Ulfon. Then we have Warriors of Chaos. Like, I'll just say it as bluntly as I can. I think Warriors of Chaos are all in broken tier with a couple of major exceptions on the subject. Yes, I'm having to scroll up and down this list. So Sigvald and Kolic, so most of the Warriors of Chaos are going to be in that tier. I think like Village has an F tier campaign, terrible starting position, not a great campaign dynamic to be dealing with. Azazel, Sigvald, and Kolic are in the same tier as Archaon, so nothing really to be said on that. That leaves Valkia, Festus, and Be'lakor. Well, I think Warriors of Chaos are too ridiculously broken, too stupidly broken, but I do think Valkia can be interesting enough as a campaign that I'm going to put her in B tier. It's just kind of fun, you know, playing that Khorne playstyle, vassalizing factions in Nagrand and beyond. Can be fun. No, honestly, I may be C tier, really, just because, like, yeah, it's a bit too powerful, really, of a campaign. Then we have Festus. I think in a lot of ways, Festus is the best Nurgle campaign in the game. I'm not going to put them in A tier because I think Warriors of Chaos are still ridiculously, stupidly broken. But if you're looking to play a Plague Nurgle campaign, I would recommend Festus. Far more so than I'd recommend Kugath or Epidemius. Tamarkan wins out because he does have those interesting chieftains. Festus wins out on how the economy works and Plague mechanics. Then we have Be'lakor. It's a free campaign available to everyone. It has good campaign mechanics. as much as I dislike Warriors of Chaos because they're like an enter button simulator, the campaign, in a lot of ways, just how stupidly broken they are, I think Be'lakor has a great unit variety, has access to a lot of units, has a lot of different possibilities in a campaign, especially with that teleportation. Now, to be certain, I'm not necessarily fond when CA is using teleportation as a crutch for a campaign mechanic, but I really do like the way Be'lakor's teleportation works because it's infinite teleportation for every single army. So in terms of teleportation mechanics, I think Be'lakor actually has the best teleportation mechanic of any faction in the game. That does add to the variety you will experience during the course of a campaign. And that is about it. That is my Legendary Lore tier list for Total War Warhammer 3. I'm sure there will be plenty of disagreements. I know exactly where there's going to be plenty of disagreements on this subject. And I just want to finish with this statement. I know people have different impressions of why I make these videos. I don't make these videos to troll people or to rage bait people. That is not as good as you might think. I'm making these videos because, one, people ask me for it. Like, people want to know which campaigns they should play. These are the campaigns that I think are worth playing. In conclusion, though, let me just say this, and I'm going to post it in a comment. Every campaign that's in broken tier is ridiculously broken in the sense that they trivialize a lot of mechanics in the game. Whether or not they're boring or good, that depends on you. Grombrindle can be fun once in a while, and I think Alariel can be fun once in a while. I think Wood Elves, Changeling Warriors Chaos are the enter button simulator. S tier campaigns, the best campaigns in the game, the exceptional campaigns, lots of replayability, lots of possibilities, just really fun. Everything between A and, like, A tier, B tier, C tier, and even D tier, they're campaigns that work. Especially A, B, and C are campaigns that you can play and have a solid enough time. You will just experience more frustration the lower down you go. D tier is where things really stop working properly as far as I'm concerned, and F tier and Daniel tier are just garbage tier campaigns that are not worth touching. Especially the Daniel tier. Now, don't play any campaign in the Daniel tier. They're just all freaking awful. That would be my perspective on the subject. Costin signing out. Stay tuned for more. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications. And this is not the strength ranking list. If I want to make a strength ranking list of Legendary Lords, I would fill it with Khorne, Warriors of Chaos, and Wood Elves. And everyone else below that. Because no one else compares to that. Stay tuned.